The next scam surrounding the USA, the Federal Reserve, Fort Knox, and the current gold supply shortages is now heating up in the Tucker Carlson podcast. Here, Luke Gromen was a guest, and Tucker Carlson realizes live on air that he has been deceived for decades by the Federal Reserve, the central bank in the USAs. But he also talks about how one of the biggest scandals ever is happening at Fort Knox, and that half of the gold market is currently being manipulated. Here, information is being released that you haven't heard in this way before. Right now, there are investigations by the Department of Government Efficiency, which is calling for an audit of Fort Knox, as well as the Federal Reserve. And Luke Gromen is bringing new, highly explosive facts to light. He goes into all the manipulations that are happening here. And everything is connected. The gold market, Bitcoin, the Federal Reserve, and Fort Knox. It's all a huge interplay of different institutions. It goes so far as to uncover interest fraud. That means the U.S. has issued government bonds over decades that were sold either above or below market value. Here, there would be a serious intervention in the market mechanisms. Both of them are also advocating for an audit of the Federal Reserve and Fort Knox. And this could get really interesting because Donald Trump has also said that Elon Musk should take an even more aggressive approach in the Department of Government Efficiency. And so many things are going to come to light here. I've done several episodes on this now, on the Federal Reserve, on Fort Knox, different people exposing different things here. Now Luke Gromen has really hit another home run, but check it out before we get to Luke Gromen's revelations. First, the scene where Tucker Carlson realizes live on air that he has been deceived for decades. And this whole thing is currently going viral here in X.
Global central banks were buying Treasury bonds, and they were selling gold.
Why would you ever buy a bond from the same person who can print the currency? I just don't understand that. I mean,
if you believe the inflation numbers, and look, there are.
No, but I mean, it's kind of like a rigged system, right? Like the government is issuing the debt, which is held in a specific currency, but that same government prints that currency.
Yeah, and that's why they're so hyper focused on the Fed managing inflation. Oh, I know it
doesn't make any sense. It's like kind of a rigged game.
It is.
My ignorance protects me from bad investments because, like, if it doesn't make sense, I'm not. Not that I invest, but like, you know what I mean?
No, and intuition is to be trusted.
Well, that just doesn't make sense.
That was ultimately why I first got an interest in gold.
Because the key question is not do you get paid back what they owe you. The key question is what you just said, which is what is the value of what they pay you back. You may get every dime back, but maybe those dimes aren't worth anything.
Well, and
they determine what the dimes are worth. So it's a rigged deal.
It's so wild the way he realizes everything, that he's been deceived. People are getting screwed over. You're getting screwed over. I'm getting screwed over. Tucker Carlson is getting screwed over. We're all getting screwed over. And he says, folks, keep your hands off government bonds. He would never touch something like that. It's such a massive scam that's going on here. So on one hand, governments are issuing debt. He says here, the government issues the debt that's held in a specific currency, but that same government is printing that currency. So on one side, they're issuing the debt, and on the other side, they're printing money, which then devalues the currency. That means you get something back later that might still look nominally the same, but in terms of purchasing power, it has massively lost value. And that's the game that a whole lot of people are buying into. And then we have manipulated inflation data, and then it says, for example, we have 2% inflation, and then the bond interest is like 3%, and everyone thinks, yeah, AAA rated bond here, best bond in the USA, let's fucking go, it can never go bankrupt, and so on. Everyone buys these bonds when you get 3% interest, and the official inflation is 2%. And you think you're beating inflation, but Tucker Carlson says all these numbers are a scam. You're getting screwed from start to finish. Not only is the currency being manipulated, like how the bond is issued, the next thing that's manipulated is the inflation data, which basically gives you the impression, hey, you made a profit with the bond. The next lie they're telling you is that the bond is default proof. The bond is only default proof until the system blows up, and sooner or later, the dollar system will blow up too. And he's laughing his ass off, saying, hey folks, you can't be that crazy to buy bonds. This is the biggest scam, the biggest Ponzi scheme that has ever been set up here. Here, the scene is just too good.
And I'm not saying there's any risk to Treasury bonds on a nominal basis. There isn't. However,
no, it sounds totally safe.
You're going to get every...
So he says, don't worry, everything is safe. It's all going to go smoothly here, and you don't need to be concerned. The dollar is safe, the euro is safe. That's what they're always selling you, here with the government bonds. But it's just not like that, because the thing is, even if you get it paid back later, yes, then you can say, okay, here the promise has been fulfilled. You have gotten the debt back. But then you just won't have any purchasing power left. So that means either you're directly cheated out of your purchasing power, or the whole thing still ends up failing later on, even though they basically promised that it will never fail. So, That hasn't happened in recent years, that U.S. government bonds or anything like that have defaulted. But Tucker Carlson knows, yeah, exactly, at some point in the future, it's going to happen. At some point, the U.S. is going to crash into a wall. The U.S. dollar is going to crash into a wall. Sooner or later, it's going to happen. And then you're better prepared and don't have such large government bond holdings in your portfolio. And now we get to the really exciting points, like how massive fraud is happening at Fort Knox and how massive fraud is happening at the Federal Reserve. You really need to listen closely to this, because this is truly mind-blowing.
Whenever you have secrecy, you have deception and fraud, period.
Generally, that's true.
That's the purpose of it, I would argue. Privacy being different from secrecy. But, something that should be disclosed that's not is not disclosed for a reason. And so when you have huge movements, you tell me if I'm overstating this, but there are now big movements of gold between countries right now, correct?
Correct.
And we're not exactly sure why.
Correct.
And we don't really know the volume, as you just said. And so someone's getting rich and someone's getting poor, but none of this is public. Like I smell scam afoot.
Tucker Carlson is clearly saying he smells a scam here, because it makes absolutely no sense what's going on with all the secrecy from the Federal Reserve, but also from Fort Knox. This is mainly about all the gold reserves, which apparently isn't even at Fort Knox. And Tucker Carlson is clearly saying that secrecy means fraud. They're hiding something really big from us that we don't know about. There's a lack of transparency in how things are being handled here. One could easily disclose this. If this were disclosed, all speculation could be put to rest in one fell swoop. But they deliberately do not make it transparent, because things are being covered up. And he also points out that there are massive movements of gold happening. But these gold movements are not transparent. Luke Gromen confirms this as well, and clearly states that no one really knows why this is happening. Luke Gromen has been in the gold market for a really long time. He's transitioned from being a gold bug to Bitcoin, but he's still very much involved in the gold market. And we don't just see this lack of disclosure at Fort Knox, but we also see it missing here at the Federal Reserve. That means a whole lot of institutions, including USAID. And who knows what else is going on here. They all have no disclosure here. And by the way, the ECB, the European Central Bank, also has no disclosure here. And let's really play through Tucker Carlson's words here. Question every institution and ask, hey, why is there secrecy here? Could the secrecy here possibly be related to the fact that people are being massively deceived? Are we being massively misled by the Federal Reserve, Fort Knox, and many other institutions? And we'll get to the Federal Reserve shortly. People are being deceived. So, at Fort Knox, they're first deceiving us with a lack of transparency, making it impossible to verify the holdings. On the other hand, there are a ton of flows, for example, from London to the U.S. In London, sometimes the bars can't even be withdrawn anymore. Then there were reports that in the Central Bank of London, there aren't any real gold bars, just fake ones. Then, they just can't keep up in Switzerland. With a gold bar being produced, only big institutional players can get their hands on any gold bars, or something like that. That means there are a ton of things happening behind the scenes where you really don't know what's going on. But it definitely seems to have something to do with Fort Knox. And now check out what he says about the gold market. Here's Tucker Carlson. Here he uncovers the next scam.
This is the Google result if you type in which countries own the most gold. Who's got the biggest gold reserves in the United States? Have you seen this list?
I have.
I'm reading this to you because it's just so clearly bullshit. So clearly not true. So this is in order the countries with the largest gold reserves. U.S. 1, okay. Number 2, Germany. Number 3, Italy. Okay, it's got an economy like the size of Ohio. France, Russia, China. Switzerland, Japan, India, Netherlands. You're telling me that China is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is number 6, and India is number 9? That's a lie. That's just a flat out lie. Like, that is not the actual ranking.
That's not the, and those.
There is no you're telling me France has bigger gold reserves than China?
And this is why when I say it's a political and
Italy?
a geopolitical medal, right? Because those are the official monetary reserves. Chinese have been bringing in 1,000+ tons of gold every year.
Have been doing? The Indians have been stockpiling gold for thousands of years. I mean, to their great credit, I'm not criticizing them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the chart of gold in Indian rupees looks like Apple in dollars. It's up and to the right forever.
So I guess the only point I'm making again and again and again is at the heart of this incredibly important phenomenon, the movement of gold around the world, is a lie. Like, there's lie. Like, we don't actually know what the state of play is.
There's not great clarity. No, there's
not great clarity. Right. There's massive lying. And again, whenever there's massive lying, there's going to be massive fraud.
Yeah, and there's a reason for it, right? There's always a real reason why that is. why, for that.
So Fort
lack of
Knox
clarity.
is one of the places, the physical places in the United States where we're told our gold is stored. Half, maybe, supposedly.
It's just absurd. He repeated again, there's massive fraud going on. That means whenever there's a lack of transparency here, we have fraud going on. And that's clearly happening here. He's going through all the countries here. He's going through the list. Who has the most gold? Who has the least gold? And then a few things stand out here, like the fact that France has more gold than China. That can't be right when we take a look. In recent years, they've been buying massive amounts of gold. Italy has more gold than China. How can it be that an economy smaller than Ohio has more gold than China? Then China is only in 6th place. India is in 9th place. He said, India, they have been buying gold for thousands of years. And here we have to pay close attention, because a podcast will now also address this. It can also make sense. It could be a tactic to report more gold reserves than one actually has, in order to position oneself better in negotiations. On the other hand, it can also make some sense. Reporting fewer gold reserves than one actually has. If you're planning a surprise effect or something like that, for example, some people assume that China or others are massively building up gold and will eventually announce, hey, we now have a gold-backed currency, or something like that. Whether that's happening or not, I can't really say anything about that. I don't want to confirm it, but there are different tactics you can use here. So one tactic is to claim you have more gold than you actually do. The other tactic is to claim you have less gold than you actually do. And the same goes for Bitcoin. There are also people nowadays who say that China has sold off all their Bitcoin holdings. On the other hand, there are people who say, for example, that the US actually has way more Bitcoin than they're letting on. Russia has way more Bitcoin than they're actually letting on. Other countries have way more Bitcoin than they let on. And you really have to keep a close eye on that. And here you have to be sure that massive fraud is taking place. It's clear that there's a lot of lying going on here. This means that on the one hand, there are lies to the top that sometimes too much Bitcoin or gold is stated, but on the other hand, there are also lies to the bottom that sometimes too little Bitcoin or gold is stated. And depending on your financial situation and your plan, it may make sense to claim that you have more Bitcoin than you actually own, or less Bitcoin than you actually own. But providing the right numbers? That happens very, very rarely. And you can see that in the manipulated charts, where all sorts of strange things happen. And now you've settled up with the gold market, with Fort Knox. And now there's going to be a major reckoning with the Federal Reserve. And it's also super relevant for Bitcoin.
We'll give you not only, you take the gold, you take the lead, and the gold is, we'll provide you protection, we'll provide you weapons, we'll let you access to our markets. And if you don't do it, we're going to regime change you. And oh, by the way, we'll give you maybe a sweetener on your, I think it's very possible they were getting higher than market interest rates on the Treasury bonds for decades as part of that deal. Who knows? But
what do you mean, who knows?
It's not something that's ever been disclosed. But
well, how can we give country-specific interest rates on treasuries?
I think I have heard credible rumblings from people that were around then that part of that deal may have been not just countries, just Saudi, may have gotten a sweeter deal than other countries.
How can that not be disclosed?
That's how you get a $10,000 wrench at Department of Defense. Wrenches don't cost $10,000. It's right. You move stuff around a little.
This is why they're always encouraging us to get mad at each other about race and the tranny stuff. You know what I mean? It's like, because the big things are just not even.
That's so crazy. Now it's coming out that the U.S. has made specific interest deals with the Saudis and so on. That means you have a market interest rate, like 2 or 3% on a bond or something like that. And they sometimes got higher interest rates. Or sometimes it's done the other way around, where you end up getting lower interest rates, depending on what kind of strategic position you had with that country. Then it means, for example, okay, the Saudis have to buy U.S. government bonds, but you do not get the official interest rate of 2%.
Instead, they only get 1% or 0% when they buy the government bonds. There are also more and more voices saying that something similar is currently being planned between the U.S. and the EU, because the U.S. has the EU on its list as well. Then Donald Trump will simply say, hey, you have been receiving military service here for so long, at virtually no cost. And now, in the future, we'll only protect you if you buy U.S. government bonds. And you won't get a market interest rate of like 2 or 3% or anything like that, but you'll have to use 0%. So you have to buy government bonds from us, but you won't get any compensation for that. Or just a very, very small compensation for that, because we're protecting you in return. And deals like that have been going on for a long, long time between the U.S. and the Saudis. And maybe something like that could happen in the future between the U.S. and the EU. But there are no official disclosures. Everything happens under the table.
And that's how you force other nations to buy U.S. government bonds. It doesn't really give them a choice. It's like, either you buy my U.S. government bonds at the exact interest rate I give you, not the free market rate. Or if you don't do that, then you have to deal with military consequences or something like that. And the sneaky part is that regular folks think, okay, there are government bonds here, and they're traded publicly on the market. But then it comes out in the background. No. Some countries are being forced to buy these government bonds. That then manipulates the interest rates again. Then there's an open market interest rate. But there's also a private market interest rate that gets dealt with behind the scenes. And then Tucker Carlson also asks, how is it possible for someone to buy an entire range, like a whole villa, for $10,000? And that can only happen if you're somehow involved with the state. And the state just somehow gives a villa through feather economics or something like that. And for example, it's like, okay, hey, on one hand, I'm offering you protection. Then someone might say, the US says to some Saudis or something, hey, I'm offering you protection. But on the other hand, you have to sell me the villa for $10,000 or something like that. Those are exactly the kinds of scams that happen in the US. And who knows what might come out. That you make deals like that, or sell some big politicians fancy villas. That means you can't just send them money directly. Then you just say, okay, I'm taking my villa, it costs $10,000. I'm selling it for $10,000, but the market value is $10 million. And then it looks like, on the surface, yeah, this is just a normal business deal and all. Nobody questions that. But of course, these are just tricks to manipulate people, to undermine the system, and to facilitate massive corruption. And Tucker Carlson also clearly acknowledges here and says, hey, the really crazy stuff is happening at the state level, with the Federal Reserve, Fort Knox, and so on. And then we think, okay, if someone steals a carrot from the shopping cart or something like that, or if someone takes a melon or something like that from the supermarket, then that's pretty bad. But no, the bad things aren't happening on the street. They're happening in secret, at the state level, with the Federal Reserve, Fort Knox, and a lot more. And this is also super relevant for Bitcoin because if the system continues to weaken, if Fort Knox falls, if the Federal Reserve falls, then the trust in the overall dollar system will also collapse. And that also means that Bitcoin can benefit massively from this. We've always seen that when the dollar is weak, Bitcoin can benefit. Bitcoin also doesn't have that lack of transparency that we see in the current system. And that's why Bitcoin can be the big winner here. But hey, folks, if you want to buy Bitcoin, I'll drop a link for you down below. 21 Bitcoin, how you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. Here, with the code, you can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. See you then. Peace out.